started. Yeah. Devices down. I'm about to close. This is going to be a pretty short lecture. In fact, right after I finished, I thought, oh wait, this is short enough. I probably could have just pushed through the break or let you out early. So kept you around a few minutes longer than you needed to be. Okay, getting technology life cycles in sync. This is something. Oh yes. We're going to do it after this because there's still a few people wandering in from the bathroom. But thank you very much. I do have it up there. This is something I've observed over the last 40 years, are different types of technology life cycles, and I suspect a number of you have observed these as well. First one, Firefly. Have you ever been some cool new technology you know is coming out? You know, it's an alpha or pre-beta or something like that. And you wait for a release, and you wait for a release, and the deadline slips, or it comes out, but it's got serious limitations, but the next release is going to fix everything, and you wait, and eventually it just sort of goes away. Yes, okay.
So this is a little bit of a stretch, but when I was in elementary school, I remember reading in Time magazine for kids that somebody was going to make a projector that could be projected from a satellite onto the atmosphere, and you could watch movies in the backyard. And I thought that was so cool.
Yeah.
So,
except you have this happen in real life in the software industry all the time. Anyone have examples of this? There are various programming languages which are going to be the next hot thing, and then no one adopts them. Yeah.
We're using a service right now to like posting and adopting and running, and we're like trying to do like a pretty basic thing that everyone needs to do, and it doesn't work. And so we're like talking to them like, oh yeah, we actually have this feature as beta. We haven't told anybody about it yet, but you can use it now. Like, portions that is working, but it's like there's still a bunch of things. Like, why isn't this like in the system you're selling right now?
Yeah.
All of the like architectures that are trying to keep with x86, like all of this and this stuff, every time they come out, they just came out with this 5. Every time one of those comes out, like, it's going to replace x86, it's going to be amazing. And everyone just keeps using x86.
Oh yeah, well that gets back to our discussion on entrenchment of technology, which is like the third article we have here. Yes?
I think, honestly, the current state of like viewing like virtual reality is a really good example, because it's this really cool technology that in really limited circumstances, people are like, wow, this is really cool, but every single iteration that they've released, it's never gained traction because it's inadequate.
Well, I have two words for you, Magic Leap. How many are familiar with Magic Leap? This remarkable enhanced reality displays where stuff is being projected around and it's sensing your toe, and they've gone through like $1 billion of investment. And everything they've come up with so far is they keep scaling back what it will actually do. It's going to be, I think, one of the great busts. Great ideas, and I think they just can't achieve what they originally said they were going to achieve and did with some heavily doctored demos, which is not unusual in the computer industry. I can remember all the way back at Convex in the 1980s, there was this new program for IBM PCs, which were a new thing back in the middle 80s, that had functionality far beyond what anyone was seeing on a PC. And everyone was jazzed, and then someone, this is, you know, big booth with pillars and so on, big expensive booth at Convex, which was the major personal computer trade show back then. Someone happened to pull open a panel that had a mini computer that was actually running the software, a personal computer, a mini computer, and basically were feeding the video signal into the screen that looked like it was hooked up to the PC. That died pretty quick. Underdone is sort of the same thing. That's before you get to the Firefly stage. This is actually more like what you were talking about, where it's kind of like, where are these features here? It's the problem you have. I think I've already told the story about being at Macworld, and this is 25 years ago, and they're releasing System 7 for the Macintosh, and I was writing for Macworld and got a presentation from the product manager, and he asked me, well, what do you think? And I said, I saw someone yesterday at the trade show wearing a t-shirt saying, I'm waiting for System 7.0.1. How many of you don't update your smart devices to the latest, newest .0 release until there's at least a .0, .1, .2? Apple has gotten so bad with 10.0, 11.0, 12.0 of iOS. It's like, oh, releases. Oh, there's big problems. Here's 12.0.1. Oh, here's 12.0.2. Oh, important security update. 12.1.2. It's like, okay, come on. Conveyor belt. This is a problem that you often run into with some technologies that have a limited lifespan, which is they come out, and this is where you're dealing with systems that have to work and function over years. Unless the software is sufficiently entrenched that it will continue to be supported, you're using it, and then you have to migrate off of it before it falls off the end of the conveyor belt. Windows XP, just a few years ago, there was a surprisingly large portion of the installed base of Windows that was still Windows XP. It's only really been within the last 3 years, a lot of that has finally moved off XP. But I still, how many of you ever do this? Often on places where they have like medical screens or point of sale or whatever, you look for something to crash and you look and say, wow, look what they're running. And quite often it's XP. There's an awful lot of point of sale, of industrial, med tech, and so on stuff that's all running on Windows XP still. It's like, you hope this isn't hooked up to the internet because they stopped updates long ago. Military kept Microsoft supporting them on Windows XP and I think Windows 2000 as well for quite a while because, boy, military systems are even slower to change out. Yeah.
So I was watching an article on that, and it said that head honchos in the military don't want to upgrade their software because they're afraid that when they upgrade, that some bug will cause it to fail their mission critical. Is that like a real?
Oh yeah.
thing that happens?
That's a real problem. Well, how many of you have software? Again, I tend to be slow to change software. I was still using Office 2003 as about 3 years ago. Mostly because I hated the whole Windows, the ribbon interface that they introduced with 2007. Anyway, I finally bit the bullet and went all the way up to Office 365, which is what I use now. I also bitterly resent the subscription model. They're just trying to squeeze money out of you. But yes, you do have that problem, and particularly in military systems, where you have reliance upon quirks of the system, the host operating system, and if you change, the software may not work anymore, or you may introduce new security issues that weren't there previously. And by the way, I read a very disturbing article about, just came out, I want to say last fall, General Accounting Office, talking about all the security flaws in our weapon systems, the software that runs our weapon systems. A lot of security flaws, like, oh great, people can actually hack into our weapon systems themselves. You had a question about it?
Now you can.
Oh. Landfill, a great promise, but dead soon after. We tend to avoid a lot of this. Probably the classic example that literally involved a landfill. IBM in the 80s, after its success at the IBM PC, which basically made personal computers respectable for businesses. Businesses, up to then you had Apple, Atari, Amiga, Commodore, and businesses like, we're not touching that. But IBM came out with personal computers like, yeah, we can do that. Well, IBM wanted to get into the home market. And they introduced this small computer called the IBM PC Junior. It was wretched. It was cheap. It had what's derided as a chiclet keyboard. Of course, most of you are too young to know what chiclet gun is. But just had a wretched keyboard, had all sorts of problems. It was such a disaster that a lot of the units ended up literally getting buried in the landfill. IBM just discontinued the line and buried the remaining units. You will, through the course of your careers, I predict, see all these. Arc of engineering, this is a problem. We've touched on to some. Shakespeare famously said, we ripe and ripe, and then we rot and rot. Well, that happens to software also. Ship it, goes into production, it's being maintained, changes are being made, and usually as changes are being made, they're being made by people who don't understand the original system as well as the original developers did, and are simply trying to find a way to make the changes work. Analysis, maintenance is actually about 2/3 adding new features and only about 1/3 fixing bugs. I suspect most of the bugs, after a certain point, are being fixed or bugs introduced by adding new features. But you get software rot, software entropy. It becomes the conceptual coherence, which may not have been great to start with, becomes worse and worse. And you have this problem that, plus you have to maintain backwards compatibility. This is why you get these situations where you have these old legacy systems entrenched in organizations like military, corporations, government, and so on. You wouldn't believe how old the technology that the IRS and the FAA run on is. Some of it goes back 40 years. You know, with the IRS, you don't necessarily want them to be more efficient. But with the FAA, yeah, you know, they're watching planes in the sky. You don't want them using old Burroughs mainframes with big fans set up as cooling units to keep them running. And what's interesting is in both those cases, both with the FAA and the IRS, you've had multiple re-engineering projects that have spanned multiple years and cost billions of dollars and have been abandoned. There are some real problems in certain organizations. The biggest advantage of Y2K for corporate America is it gave them a reason to get rid of a lot of systems that they were having trouble getting rid of. When the Y2K problem came around, the company's like, what's that? How many of you know what the Y2K problem is? Okay, you know what it is. It was a real problem. People say, no, it wasn't a real problem. No, trust me, I spent 2 years. I got sucked into this at Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae would have shut down if they hadn't done Y2K remediation. It took them 2 years and several $1 million to do all the changes. And one of the things that happened as a result of that is that there were a lot of systems that people within Fannie Mae had wanted very much to get rid of because they were old, creaky systems and had never been able to get management permission to do so. And with Y2K, they could say it's going to take more time and money to fix this than simply to replace it with a new system. So this was actually a great burning of the underbrush for corporate America. The government and military, for some reason, just simply patched everything. So you have some really, really awful systems out there. So this is something to keep in mind because there's a good chance that your first job, and maybe your second or third or fourth, out of college, you're going to be doing maintenance on existing software rather than writing brand new software. There's going to be some existing products, some existing system, and you're going to be given a list and say, here's the bugs to fix, here are the features to add, and you're going to do it. I have done that off and on through my entire career. Okay. Speaking of entrenchment of technology, I wrote an article back in 1996. Now you have to understand, Windows 95 had only come out actually about a year and a half before. I think Windows 95 was released in late 94. Windows 95 was a milestone because it was the first version of Windows good enough to make people not care about the Macintosh. It was pretty much why Apple never got any market share. It wasn't better than the Mac OS at that time, but it was good enough that it was easier for people to simply buy PC clone and put Windows 95 on it. So, Back in '96, I made the observation, Windows may still be dominant in 2025. That's only 6 years from now. I'm right. Here's current desktop market share. Guess what that big blue section is? That's Windows. And it's a very interesting phenomenon. The reason why technology entrenches itself is because it can cost so much to try and change it. Stop and think for a minute. Let's take, and what I found is this applies across different things. Basically, once you get it entrenched, you can slipstream it. Now, if I had a chart up here that showed OS share for all electronic devices, Windows would be small. The two dominant ones would be, well, it'd be Android first, then iOS. I'm not sure where iOS and Windows would match up. But Windows would have a tiny percentage because you have mobile devices and you have PCs. That's how technology changes. You have to have stuff that works in parallel rather than directly replaces. The simple truth is, for all the proponents of Linux and Mac OS and Chrome OS and so on, they're not going to replace Windows on the desktop until the desktop computer goes away. A lot of people thought the desktop computer would go away by now. Sales have been declining, but there's still like 1 billion PCs out there in the world. And guess what? A lot of those are still going to be in use 40 years from now. That may seem hard to believe, but a lot of it will be. A lot of stuff is running. There's a lot of stuff that's still running on hardware from 40 years ago. And of course, Microsoft's advantage is PCs almost always come with Windows pre-bundled, so in an immediate market. Now, what you have is the first really sufficient technology to a particular area tends to gain dominance. And you have other factors that entrench it. Let's take the internal combustion car. I've been watching people try to do alternatives to the gas car for 40 years. We used to have a researcher here, I think he's still alive, Roger Billings, I want to say his name is. When I was an undergraduate here, he was touting hydrogen cars as the next big thing. And we still find stuff about hydrogen cars. Electric cars. We sell electric cars. How many electric cars are there compared to internal combustion cars? It's about, what, 1 million electric cars on the road? Right now, there's about 300 million internal combustion cars on the road. Stop and think about the infrastructure. How many gas stations are here in Provo? How many electric charging stations are here in Provo? How many repair shops that are equipped to repair gas-powered cars are here in Provo? How many repair stations that are equipped to repair electronic cars are here in Provo? Now let's apply this to self-driving cars. I'm a profound skeptic of self-driving cars as a software engineer, because it's very easy to get them to the 80% level, and then you start to deal with all the edge cases. Stop and think. We have about 40 million people, 40,000 people who are killed a year by human beings driving cars. We don't have artificial intelligence that's the smartest people. Probably won't for decades to come. That's something else I've been watching. AI is one of my areas of professional interest. They were touting smart AI as being 10 years away back in the 1950s. It's always been 10 years away, for half a century. Smart AI and break-even fusion. They've been touting that for 50 years too. We still don't have it. It doesn't mean it won't happen, but I look at the track record. Everybody's skeptical. Self-driving cars, we don't have the AI to do a true self-driving car unless we change the infrastructure. Yes. Self-driving cars do real well, give them their own little special lane and they can stay in that and so on. They can do that, but as soon as they get out of a constrained environment, I get nervous every time I drive home because I go down 9th East to State Street, I head south on State Street, and I turn left, onto 800 South, right across from the cemetery. And I know there's a family right here that has 3 kids who like to run out in the street. And every time I turn, I slow down to like 10 miles an hour, and I start looking very carefully. Because all it would take is one kid running between cars right in front, and his life and mine would be ruined. We do not have the intelligence to have self-driving cars handle that. They work really great in the 70 to 80% case, and they fall apart very quickly after that. Assisted cars are great. I have a rental car right now that has things like, if I'm driving on a freeway with cruise control, it senses the cars in front of me and will automatically slow me down to match their speed with a certain number of car lengths between me and them. You know, stuff like that you can do. Stuff that we do as humans almost without thinking and driving. The judgments, the dozens of little decisions that we make every minute. And the trade-offs we make. If you do research in self-driving cars, they have the who do you kill problem. What happens if a self-driving car sees there's a human over here and a human over here, and it has no choice but to hit one or the other? What does it do? Or maybe the third choice is to go into an embankment and kill the driver. Does it kill the driver? Does it kill, deliberately choose one of these two? Who does it choose? And stop and think of the lawsuits that will happen the first time that happens. Like I said, we kill 40,000 people a year driving as humans. We injure, I don't know how many, probably a million or so. Maybe more. Who can sustain that level of litigation? The self-driving cars. So you have this entrenchment. One of the reasons Microsoft's entrenched is doc files, Excel files. I mean, when you go to third-party alternatives, what do they have to maintain? Compatibility. If you're doing a word processor, you've got to be able to open Microsoft files. A lot of people say, well, I'll just get Microsoft Office then. Okay, an article on septic code, I'll just let you read that. Any questions or comments before I take roll here and send you all back out to the room? Everybody's like, no, we're ready to go. Look at that. Pretty early. Let me take roll.